Welcome to the EarthWorks podcast, where our team will share the jargon of carbon from many of our turf friends from the past 30 years.
Hi again, everybody. 2 weeks in a row for me. I'm Kevin Hicks with EarthWorks, and welcome to another EarthWorks podcast. This week, I'm pumped to have Marcus Harness. He's just over the mountains on the west side of Washington at Sandpoint Country Club. Marcus, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Kevin, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you kind of approached me at GIS this year and said, hey, I'd love to get on. I think I got a little bit different perspective on things, and we'll dive into that here in a minute. But describe where Sandpoint is and in relation to Seattle and kind of give us a geographical rundown and then a little rundown on yourself.
Yeah. So Sandpoint is located in Seattle proper, Northeast Seattle, perched up on the hill overlooking Lake Washington.
Right.
It's a cool club, established in 1927, been here a long time and really developed its success off of being really the only true country club in Seattle. We offer all the amenities of a country club. So not only golf, but swim, tennis, got a great food and beverage program. So it's fun. And that's kind of where they've gained their success and established themselves in their market. So
how many members?
450 equity.
And are there other memberships, social and tennis and all that?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what they cap out at, but we have a huge swim and tennis membership. Honestly, it's got a longer waiting list than the golf course. Some people will just jump on and go full equity just so that they can have access to the swim and tennis.
It's kind of the opposite direction, right? So most will join the social side first to get their foot in the door.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. And how many rounds do you typically do? Because I think something that people that don't live out this way, they don't realize that you guys are going 12 months out of the year. It's a little bit different in the wintertime, but I mean, there's people tuning it up every day of the year if it's not pouring buckets rain.
Yeah, and I mean, we all know that COVID's been good for golf.
Right.
So these numbers might be a little skewed, but before I got here and before our renovation, that we were doing about 25,000 rounds a year, and we're up to like 35,000 rounds a year. And to your point, our heavy lifting is between the aerification seasons, April through September, and but we do stay open year round. We don't go full dormant. We definitely just get cloudy and wet. We have some deep freezes, but yeah, we're maintaining year round to prepare the golf course for play while juggling off-season projects. The intervals and the intensity of the maintenance just goes way down.
Sure. I'm always amazed coming over Snoqualmie Pass into the city, and as soon as you hit Issaquah, the weather's just completely different over there. And it's, even for me who gets over there quite a bit, it's amazing that you're 5 hours from me and it could be a world apart. It's pretty incredible how much different it is over there.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, okay. So let's dive into, you're a Coug, right? You're a Washington State grad.
Go Cougs.
You were probably one of the last or later classes for Dr. Johnston and really the program, weren't you?
Yeah, I can't recall exactly when it came to an end. Probably like 5 years after I graduated. I graduated in 2009. But yeah, our numbers were definitely getting a little smaller towards the end. So
does it surprise you that so many, I mean, San Luis Obispo's gone. I don't know if there's students at UC Riverside, but it's pretty much down in the West. It's pretty much down to online students at Walla Walla Community College and Oregon State. Are you surprised about that?
It's hard to tell. The industry, the demand for students and the mid-range technicians as well as assistant superintendents, at least in our Pacific Northwest region, has never been higher. We're just trying to find these guys, and it's really hard. But what I'm kind of correlating is I'm seeing a lot more people entering the business because they grew up in it and they determined that this was their passion, that what they wanted to pursue, as opposed to going to college and figuring it out.
Right.
And so now you have a different type of class. Like I have guys, let's see, 2 people on staff right now that are doing the Walla Walla program online. and but they have to support their livelihood, and so they're
Sure.
balancing online classes and working, and it seems to work out pretty well.
Yeah, the online thing, I was a traditional on-campus student when I went through school, and it never really clicked for me. But boy, especially with the changes we've seen in the last couple of years, it makes a heck of a lot more sense than it used to. I've got my middle son will graduate, and his wife as well graduated without ever stepping foot on the campus that they got their diplomas from. And that's just a strange, it's an out of the ordinary experience for me, but it's where we are. And online education, just like online everything, is I think that's really how it's going to go in the future.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and it doesn't hurt that there are some pretty quality online programs,
right?
And probably, as it's really important to get that education. But I mean, I attribute a lot of my knowledge to on-hands experience,
right?
And learning in the field. So it's kind of that necessary accreditation that kind of helps support the big picture.
Get your foot in the door at least, and get you the base. But you're right, the on-the-job training, the experience in the field is still irreplaceable, in my opinion. I totally agree with that. So did you encourage the two team members that are doing the online program, or did they come to you?
These guys in particular came to me. I have encouraged other people in the past. I think to a certain extent it's passive aggressive encouragement, in the sense that they are just buying into what we're doing.
Right.
Well, no. And on their end, they see how excited me and my assistant Sean are about what we're doing and how passionate we are. And
right.
We really try and grow people within the operation, whether they're moving on to bigger and better things. But with some people, it just clicks and they enjoy it and realize that they can make a career out of it.
That's a great point and a great way to look at it. I mean, it's just like smiles are infectious. I mean, passion and energy are infectious as well. And it helps with buy-in, whatever it is, whether it's daily maintenance or like you guys went through a big renovation, and you got to have that team behind you or you're not going to get it done, obviously.
For sure. So, and it's just fun to be on a golf course. And when you realize you could do it for a living,
right.
It's a win-win, right?
Yep. That's exactly right. So you got out of school and I didn't know a lot about you. I've kind of known of you, but as I read through your bio, you've been in a lot of places. Without breaking down every one, you spent some time on the Monterey Peninsula. You've been at Sahalee, previous to Sandpoint. Walk me through. More importantly, I think, because you really wanted to touch on, what's important for young guys that want to work their way up through the ranks, that want to be successful in this industry. So walk me through how you mapped out your career path, because I think I think there's a lot of guys that kind of fly by the seat of their pants, and there's others that say, okay, this is my end goal, or this is my 5-year goal. And so in order to achieve that, I've got to do this, this, and this. So what were those steps and why?
Well, I think the first step was just, I started out at my home course, and it was a summer job that I loved. And, so the passion came in. But it was funny because I grew up at a small 9-hole course called Meadowmere Golf and Country Club. Gary Duffner was, almost like a father figure to me.
Sure.
But it was a small crew, small operation, like 3 full-time guys. And I didn't even know turf was real. Like a turf degree was a real thing when I went to Washington State.
And you're in it.
And so then, I figured it out once I was in college, that it's something I could pursue. And then from there, probably the biggest one of the game changers for me was I started at Palouse Ridge when they were building the new golf course.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you realize that there is something to this industry. There's something bigger. And I started working and becoming friends with all of the other turf students working at the golf course. And so then you start to really feed off of each other, and just, ideas start flying. And then obviously as part of school, you got to do some internships. And fortunately for me, I did some really good internships with Seattle Golf Club, Matt Schultz. I was kind of dipping my toes into high-end course conditioning. I mean, I didn't know anything about high-end private clubs until I set foot there. I showed up with my big waffle stomping boots, and Matt wouldn't let me walk on the green. So I had to kind of learn the hard way.
Yeah.
You know, and then I kind of really started to realize that, you know, at that point I had a lot to learn. And, you know, talking to people, it just, you really started to need to build your tool belt for success, right? Taking and drawing from each of your experiences. You know, my next summer I did internship with Steve Keeley at Glendale, and he really has solidified himself as like my number one mentor. He's just such a great dude.
Right.
And you know, having that mentorship to help guide you and navigate you into the future. I've consulted him on every single one of my decisions along the way. Like, hey, what do you think about this? And it really kind of started with surrounding myself with people that I wanted to be. Right. Nobody knows how to be a superintendent at a high-end private club better than a superintendent at a high-end private club. So,
that's
you know,
exactly right.
Their feedback. And, you know, I got out of school at an interesting time in 2010. There wasn't anything going on in terms of jobs. And Steve, you know, so opportunity came down in Monterey, and I wasn't really sure. I'd never been there before. But obviously the Pebble Beach company is, you know, really a household name. And Keeley was the guy that kind of said, dude, you got to get down there. And that, you know, really slingshotted broadening my horizons. You know, and then I started realizing, like, I know my end game. I don't have a timeline. But I started chasing experiences, and unique experiences to kind of make me a diverse, well-rounded guy.
Right.
And so, you know, going to Monterey, I had some exposure to the 2010 US Open. My time was cut short a little bit down there. You know, my mom got a little sick. She's fine now, but you know, that all kind of came into play to moving back home. But, you know, even then, Overlake in 2010, they were doing renovations. So like, and so I was like, okay, I haven't really, I was exposed a little bit in college to the full construction, but I haven't really done any renovations. And, you know, they're a pretty well-to-do club in the Seattle area. And so I working for Scott Stambaugh, you know, got my feet wet in the renovation world. And, you know, that kind of triggered more opportunities and more doors to open. And, and you know, then moving to Whitehorse, it was more autonomy based. We were kind of, Overlake was a big operation with multiple assistants, whereas Whitehorse was an opportunity for me to be the main guy in terms of an assistant. Eric Linsenmeyer, awesome superintendent, really just gave me the reins to run the day to day. And I learned so much starting at a smaller scale, right? I'd already experienced the high standard, but then I really was in the seat to figure out, you know, how to manage your resources. And starting small was actually really beneficial for me, and keeping it simple. And then eventually I'm transitioned to Sahali, and, you know, Tom Hughesgen is just a class act. I mean, I couldn't have thought about, oh man. And I could have worked with that guy for 20 years. We just had so much fun together, but it was just kind of taking, you know, the foundation that I had built up to that point, and then he really just let me run with it. And, you know, a golf operation doesn't get much harder than Sahali. 27 holes. It's a zoo with high expectation. And so we had a lot of fun together. And, you know, just chasing those diverse experiences really helped. But I also paid a lot of attention to who I was going to be working for, and, you know, what type of mentorship that they would bring, what type of success that they have had. Because I'm just trying to learn, and we're still learning.
Yeah.
You know,
okay. So day, I want to back up a little bit. So
Yeah.
Go back for a second to Whitehorse. That's a little bit out of town, right?
Yeah, so that's a smaller operation on the west side of the Puget Sound. So about a 35-minute ferry ride from Seattle.
I've played there. My son's bachelor party started there and ended badly, but his in-laws have a place on Tiger Lake, which is right down the road. But you know, if there's a downside to the high-end experiences that you were talking about earlier, and you know, certainly from an internship standpoint, but also I think once you get into an assistance role, one of the downsides I think is that you don't necessarily get to see the broad scope. Whereas, like you said, you get an opportunity at a you know, a middle of the road club like that, you get an opportunity to really get your hands dirty and do everything. And there's value to that, as well as, you know, the resume builder type of clubs. And I think that's really cool that you've, you know, because a lot of guys they'll pick a path and kind of stay on it and maybe miss some of those little details along the way that, you know, that really build not necessarily your resume, but really build your skill set for later on. I commend you on that, because I think that's a thing that I've seen a lot, where guys just, you know, that I'm going to be the superintendent at Augusta, so I need to stay here, and here. And, you know, there's been 2 superintendents at Augusta in the last, 40 years. So I think adjusting those, but, you know, like you said, it almost sounds as if when you looked at an opportunity, you were interviewing the superintendent as much as he was interviewing you. And I think that's, you know, that's a really good take home message for aspiring superintendents is, you know, don't necessarily just look at the name on the club, but are you going to get anything out of it?
For sure. And you know, and touching back on that mentorship side of things, you know, none of the guys that I worked for had a hidden agenda. You know, they were an open book, and I could get the most out of my experience that I wanted. They were more than willing to allow me to participate in pretty much everything. So, you know, even at a young age, being an intern at Seattle Golf Club, I took advantage of the opportunity to be a fly on the wall at green committee meetings.
Sure.
You know, because I also learned at an early age that growing grass is the easy part of being a superintendent. And so, you know, learning the politics of it all, and more than anything, just watching the superintendents and seeing how they interact, what they focus on, where they put their foot down, where do they, you know, pull back the reins. Because I wasn't even really that active in communicating until I got to Sahali, but I just found myself like wanting to jump out of my shoes with some of the conversations that were being had to defend our operation and defend things, where, you know, I'm looking across the table at these superintendents who are calm, cool, and collective. And so that, you know, just that impact of just observing really had a great benefit to my maturation process.
Yeah, but you know, that's the important thing there, and you're underselling it. But the important thing is that takes a level of desire and interest in being involved, and you know, like you said, inserting yourself into those situations. A lot of guys don't really seek that out, and I think if you want to grow and you want to build your skill set, you've got to seek those opportunities out for sure.
Well, it comes back to, you know, knowing where you want to be, right? If you want to be at a public resort or anything along those lines, you probably shouldn't be too concerned about club politics.
Yeah.
And it is as you know, it's a commitment. You know, the golf visit, those committee meetings are at 6 o'clock at night, and then you've already been at work since, you know, 5 in the morning. That's a long day.
I had a long discussion with a friend in the industry, and he asked the question, why do they have to be at 6 at night when you got there at 5 in the morning? You know, and it's a valid question. I mean, if you're running the business from X to X, maybe some of those things, but I don't see those changing because we don't set the schedule, I guess.
Let me know when they do, because I still have to explain to my wife, and I don't have a good answer.
Well, but you know, that's a good point. You got a support system at home that's really important. I think a lot of times we take that for granted, and I know that through the years, my wife has been the one to kind of pull back on the reins and say, slow your butt down or you're going to kill yourself, sort of thing. And you know, As
Yeah,
an old guy to a young guy, I'll tell you, listen to her, because she knows better than you do in that regard.
Yeah, the unsung heroes of the golf business are definitely the wives of the superintendent, for sure.
The spouses play a bigger role than we give them credit, for sure. So,
Yep.
okay, so you're at Sahalee. Had Tom hadn't left yet when you did, right? Did he leave after you?
He left after I did.
Okay,
correct. Yeah, so
so you two left a
I
pretty
think
big
he left
gap
about
there.
a year. Yeah. I mean, fortunately, Sahalee had a great opportunity. We had a lot of guys that worked with us during that tenure that have moved on to superintendent roles already. And that pipeline was still in place for, the next man up mentality, and they actually have promoted from within. So
Good.
I think they're in pretty good hands right now.
Yeah,
I know
great.
Tom's relaxing down in San Diego a little bit. I mean, he likes to stay busy, but he likes that sunshine.
I don't know how much relaxing is going on at that club with all the stuff that's happening. I haven't had a chance to stop in and see him, but I know it's been busy.
I went down there, did a ride around with them when we were at the show in San Diego, and it's intimidating. I have never worked with warm season grass, and so even him, I think he's got a pretty steep learning curve, but he's a unwavering professional. It's awesome out there.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool piece of property. Okay, so this is the interesting part of the story. So I assume you get contacted by Sandpoint, and talk about the timeline from the time you interviewed to the time all hell broke loose, essentially. I mean, it's pretty interesting. Fill in some of those blanks.
Yeah, so it was a pretty crazy summer, to say the least.
Yeah.
So Craig Sampson was the superintendent before I got here, and he had retired after right around 35 years.
Okay.
And towards the end of his tenure, the club had engaged David McClay-Kidd in doing a master plan. And then that really just snowballed into an entire course remodel.
Right.
And ultimately it was determined that it was probably in the best interest of the club to get a new guy in to, be with the new golf course from the ground up. And so I think I interviewed for that job in June of 2019. Or maybe July. Anyways, got the offer, started August 2019, and then broke ground on construction and the following month in September. So it was like drinking from a fire hose,
right,
to start out, for sure.
So had the previous superintendent kind of announced his retirement, and then they said, hey, let's try to get this transition going a little quicker?
Yeah, so it was actually a pretty fast interview process. I only interviewed once. They basically selected their short list, did one round of interviews, and then made a decision. Because we were on a pretty quick timeline heading into getting prepared for this major renovation.
So since you wanted to address assistants, what did you learn? Because that was your first big interview. I mean, obviously they were all important, but that was your first big one. So what did you take away from that experience?
Being prepared is key. I wanted to be able to make sure that I got every ounce of information that I wanted to make sure that audience could hear out. And so I did a presentation, just because, it's also nerve wracking, it's easy to slip your mind if you're kind of winging it. Right.
Right.
And probably the other benefit that I had is I had been actively interviewing for the past year. Not necessarily at, every job that I interviewed for, I definitely would have considered if I got offered the position, but it was more for the practice, to put myself in front of a board or a group of members, a selection panel. And so when Sandpoint rolled around, I was a lot more prepared to to go. And trust me, the nerves were running. I mean, I've wanted to work at Sandpoint for the last 10 years. You know, I'm the Seattle guy. I'm looking at all the clubs and like, who's retiring? Oh, I guess Sandpoint's probably my best bet.
That's the one.
I better not mess this one up. So,
yeah. Well, that's pretty cool. And Marcus shared with me the presentation he made to I would assume it was a hiring committee or the board or something. But so how did there was a conversation on Twitter last week about, I think it was John Kaminsky's tweet at Penn State. He was talking about, their students were doing mock interviews with a group of superintendents, and some were doing PowerPoint, some weren't doing PowerPoint. And it was a whole big discussion on, whether there was validity to that or not. You did a lot of preparation. I mean, you had pictures of the course, you had, a lot about you, but some of your previous experience. How did you set that up? How did you, I mean, there's so much information that can be attained with the click of a mouse. How did you collate all that into that presentation? Because I think that had to have set you apart, I would assume. But it showed your initiative, not only your initiative, but your high level of interest in that job, because you went through that effort. So how did you set that up?
I really kind of focused on making sure that they knew who I was and what I'm about.
Yeah.
So highlighting previous experience, even just sharing like who I am as a person for, a little personal connection, but then also just kind of my core beliefs about how I go about my business. From there, I tried to do a little bit of my due diligence on researching the golf course, and obviously understanding what they have coming down the pipeline, and ultimately what my previous experience might be able to bring to the table in terms of addressing what they have going on. And with Sandpoint in particular, they have a huge golf course renovation coming down the pipeline. Honestly, per timeline and scope, one of the largest the Pacific Northwest has ever seen. And while I haven't been part of a full remodel, I wanted to show that I'm good at juggling balls. And because that's really what it is. You'll find the answers. It's just how many balls can you juggle without dropping them, right?
Exactly. So did you have an opportunity to walk the golf course prior to and do that side of it? No. No, okay. It was, unfortunately, I had played it once the year prior, just out of leisure activity. But
like I said, this process was pretty fast. So. And
did you have access to the plans of the renovation, or you kind of went in blind?
I knew kind of the gravity of it, and in terms of the technical construction documents, those didn't get really thrown on my plate until after I was selected.
After they said you're the guy.
Yeah.
All right. So they bring you on board. Was there time with the retiring superintendent to kind of hand over the reins, or did he fade out pretty quickly?
Time flies. Time was flying. There was about a month of overlap, which was great at first, and then it almost felt like we were stepping on each other's toes a little bit. I mean, we established right out the gate, like, Craig's a great dude, and there was nothing but mutual respect. It was kind of got into, I need to get up and going and, digest this. And I just told him, I was like, Craig, you've served this place for 35 years. You've done a fantastic job. Just enjoy your time. And,
good for you.
Yeah.
Typically those transitions are usually half the time that the superintendent agrees to, because like you said, both parties are like, okay, we're good. You ready to go? Yep, I'm ready to go. So that's it's nice that he afforded you that, but at the same time, I mean, if it's going to be your baby, you better figure out how to care for it, right?
Yeah. Well, and I just, it was a lot to digest in a short amount of time. And sharing an office was just like, we were sharing a desk. I was like, Craig, man, I gotta
stretch out here.
My pencils are,
Yeah. Okay. So
but he's great.
So equipment starts mobilizing a month into your tenure at the club, and was Ridgetop Inc. the contractor for the whole project, or did they just kind of bite off parts of it?
No, they were the primary general contractor. They subcontracted out some of the larger irrigation work,
Right.
and then we did a lot of the irrigation work. But yeah, I mean, they were start to finish the go-to guys, and honestly, like, enough can't be said about those guys. I mean, they're the best in the Pacific Northwest. So
Kip and I have been friends for a long time, and I told him 25 years ago, if I put a shovel in the ground, it's not without you. I just, this isn't an advertisement for Ridgetop, but they're definitely the best in the Northwest, like you said. So, so where do you start? What's the first order of business? You did to kind of break down what was done. I've got notes here, but just kind of quickly break down what the scope was going to be.
Yeah. So, the overall scope was a complete remodel of one par three, remodeling 10 green complexes. In some capacity, some were full rebuilds, some were partial expansions. I think it was about 5 and 5 actually.
Okay.
And redid all the bunkers, added 40 plus bunkers. So we had built 84 new bunkers.
Are we still adding bunkers? Are we doing that nowadays? I didn't know we were doing that.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, I guess so.
Redid probably about 85% of the T complexes, incorporated about 15 acres of native grass. We haven't installed it yet, but the design is heathland inspired. So we are going to be looking at transplanting some heather here pretty soon.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And then we increased our short grass just altogether by about 60%. So lots of just shave outs, and obviously with the new construction, shaving those down. So it was quite a dramatic change. So we broke ground in September, closed the front 9 altogether.
September of 19, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Okay. Shut the front 9 down altogether, and then ended up closing the back 9 right around the holidays, and ultimately reopened in May and June. We were on track to open in April of 2020, but a little friend called COVID-19 kind of threw a kink in some things. So
just a few things, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, from a timing perspective and the cost of materials, your timing couldn't have been better for the club. And I'm hopeful that you've conveyed that to them, that, pulling the trigger at that point, it'd be a very, very large percentage more expensive to try it right now. I know that.
Yeah. I mean, we have one more par 3 that we got tied up in the permitting process, that we had all the materials for, the HDPE pipe in the ground, and we've just been holding on to it. I've had people doing other projects just reaching out, asking if they can have it. I was like, no way.
Not a chance. No. Market value plus 25%. I might let it go. Right.
Right.
So you said 10 greens were touched. I've seen enough of kids' work to know that it's probably a departure from what you had prior. So how did you incorporate the 8 greens you didn't interrupt with the 10 that were worked on and make that flow?
Are you referring to like a management of the different?
No, more architectural.
The greens at Sandpoint already had a lot of unique character. A lot of it was inspired more by pinnable locations.
Okay.
A lot of them were slopes, so we were trying to capture more pinnable locations on the greens that we expanded. And the other holes are relatively consistent. It's not like you're going to go to some of these other clubs that you could tell right away it's different architecture. They did a really good job of kind of tying in the old with the new.
So the 8 were more of a template for what we wanted to do with the other 10. Is that kind of how you look at it? Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And I won't speak for those guys too much. I grow the grass. They do the design work. So.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. Sometimes I've seen enough clubs that, well, I really like the concept on that green. And then, like you said, it doesn't look like the same golf course when it's done. And so that's always interesting to me, how a club will pick and choose which ones, are in need of renovation and which ones are good, or kind of the template for what we want them to look like. So I just wanted to get into that a little bit.
Yeah.
One of the things you did, and it's a little more common, where annual bluegrass is the primary species. I know through Monterey this is done a lot. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, and don't let me forget to talk about bunkers, but you pulled the existing turf off of the greens and laid it off to the side during construction. So talk about that, because I think in a lot of parts of the country, it's just rip those out, put bent grass back down. But when you're talking 100 years of maturation and 100 years of, transitioning to perennial biotypes, in a climate that it's a POA climate, it's no matter what we do, it's going to be annual bluegrass at some point. So how did you pull that off?
I will say it was a little intimidating. I hadn't done it before.
Right.
But relying on my network of friends in the business, I was able to pick and pull enough to be dangerous, and ended up devising a pretty good strategy in terms of caring for the turf while it was just being staged. You really want to focus first off on staging the sod in particular, making sure that it's well draining from a slope standpoint,
right?
Adequate sunlight if possible. And then even just having a little bit of a perforation in that tarp. We actually used a greens cover so that some water could percolate through. And so you're not in that much of a bog.
Yeah.
So staging was key. Keeping your fertility levels relatively low, a little bit on the leaner side, right before harvesting, so you don't get a lot of excess growth.
Sure.
And then the preventative applications, from a fungicide standpoint, our big targets are fusarium, especially when we were doing the work. It's Seattle, it's
right,
40 60 and rainy.
And if that tarp isn't draining, you're sitting in water and you're just exacerbating the whole situation.
Yeah, and then that's also why we did a preventative for Pythium as well, just in case that water is hanging around a little bit.
Yeah. So it goes down on plastic somewhere close to the construction zone. How long did your team do the sod stripping, or did you bring in a contractor for that portion?
Ridgetop did all of the lifting and laying.
They did. Okay.
And they have a pretty awesome machine for doing it. So that aspect of it, was pretty seamless. It was more just, keeping that turf healthy. And it was staged on the tarp for, I think the longest some of the sod was staged on the tarp was, the better half of 2.5 months.
Okay. So that was going to be my next question, is how long was it sitting on that plastic? That's a long time.
Yeah. And so when you're doing that in, December, January, February, the turf isn't actively growing. I mean, it's not dormant, but it's, we had some pretty rough looking sod that we put back on the greens, in February. And it's like, holy cow, I got to get this playable in 2 months. But, then one thing that we were really big on was, fertility management afterwards. We, shout out to EarthWorks, put some pre-plant fertilizer down. And that really just got, the roots rocking and rolling. Did a couple granular applications on top. I would say to anybody that's doing this, be patient. It's not going to rebound overnight. I over fertilized a little bit on a couple of the greens. Didn't get into any crazy trouble. But a half pound of N here and there just to give it a little bit of a shot really went a long way. And then it was just sand it, punch it, roll it, repeat.
Yeah. how quickly were you on it with the air fires and that kind of thing? I mean, the advantage you had is same growing medium in the sod as you did, exactly the same as you did in the construction material. So you don't have to, get on it necessarily for that, but I'm sure you still jumped on it. How quickly did you do that?
As soon as possible. It was mainly weather permitting, because you
Right.
wanted to get a decent amount of sand down.
Yeah.
And being in the Pacific Northwest, you really just watch the weather, and you might get a dry day only once every 14 days. So you got to go.
Yeah.
But that whole project, you just, persistence was key,
Right.
because of some of those variables. You just gotta do it. And I have become more aggressive in my routine maintenance of the golf course, because of that experience. When I had no other alternative to try and convert this freshly sodded, scary looking green into a playable putting surface,
Yeah.
I didn't really have any other options. And then I, in turn, realized that it wasn't that bad. Whereas, I had kind of learned through the years, when it's wet and stagnant, less is more, avoiding mechanical damage, everything like that. But since my experience, I've really tried to incorporate more of an off-season top dressing program, take advantage of the rain. You don't have to, if you go at a light rate, just let the water run it in. It's just, you really just are battling, accessibility to the golf course and how wet it is.
Speaking of that, and this is kind of an aside, but it was certainly my understanding of your climate. I mean, you get 40 inches of precipitation.
Yeah, right? I think we have 43 last year.
But the thing,
and we've had sorry, go ahead.
No, the thing that people don't realize is there's a 3 to 4 month spread in the summertime that no zero or close to it, and so when you look at irrigation and you think, it's in Seattle, we don't need irrigation. Well, the growing season, there's not a whole heck of a lot of precipitation happening. It's all in the shoulders. So planning for drainage, I'm sure, was a really important step in the process, and planning for being able to access the greens in the off season when things are so wet all the time. Like you said, that's something I learned about your climate that I, not being from the area, didn't realize.
Yeah, it's like we talked about, we're open 12 months out of the year,
right?
So obviously the off season, we're doing more project oriented tasks, and our maintenance is a little less aggressive. But drainage and moving water is key. Whether it's from cultural practices or installing subsurface drainage, and especially with a winter and off season that we've had. I mean, we've almost had 32 inches since last September. We had a historically wet fall. So we're just trying to really move water is the key this time of year.
Yep. And through the construction, through the renovation, the changing of the short grass areas, did maintenance get harder or easier or about the same? You didn't really have a whole lot to base it off of prior, but your team would know.
I mean, it's more. I mean, that's really what the golf course is better with the new design, but it is more to account for. Obviously,
well, you've got 40 more bunkers, like you said.
40 more bunkers. Like I said, we basically added another 9 holes worth of short grass onto our existing 18 hole footprint.
Right.
And so, that was a big challenge. Communicating that to the club that, hey, you built this Ferrari. Now we got to take care of it, and
we got to use premium in this thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You don't want to just never vacuum it or wash it. We gotta, not only bridge the gap for the increased demand in the golf courses, but you also brought me on to improve the golf experience. And
sure,
they did a great job in the past, but we were just two different schools of thought. I'm a lot
different golf course
aggressive.
too.
It really, so from a historical standpoint, I didn't have a lot to really reference. I just kind of knew what was in front of me, and it in all reality, it was like building a new golf course as we transitioned into the season and maintaining it for the first time. So,
and the goal wasn't a restoration per se, it was a renovation, correct?
Yeah, it was more of a reimagination of what it could have been when it opened in 1927. Yeah.
Is it okay? So obviously we've increased maintenance. Did it improve in approachability from a player's perspective, or was the goal to make it maybe more challenging? What did the club want out of that?
I think the ultimate goal was just to improve the overall member experience on the golf course.
Sure.
David Kidd, and shout out to his associate Nick Shawn. He was really the boots on the ground guy. Their vision's super aligned, and they both did a fantastic job. But the cool thing that they did with their design was they made it probably more difficult for the skilled players and a little bit more friendly for the higher handicaps. With the short grass and everything, we're trying to encourage a little bit more of a ground oriented approach game. You can roll it up and stuff. Still working on thinning out the native a little bit. That's had mixed reviews, but the bunkers are there, but you can go out and play an entire round of golf and you're not like, man, there's too many bunkers out here.
Yeah. I think that's something that team does really, really well. Like you said, they can really put the screws to the low handicappers, but at the same time, I've seen several times at Gamble Sands where, you get maybe a golfer or a higher handicapper male golfer, and they don't see any of the difficulty in that golf course. They'll hit putter off of one of the par 3 tees, but it's
guilty.
But it's all you want if you're a 3 handicap. It's pretty amazing how they can take those two diametrically opposed worlds and bring them into one golf course. It's that aspect of architecture just fascinates me, how they can basically create several golf courses all in one template.
So, it's interesting because we only tip out at 6,100 yards. But the tale of two stories between like the tips and the blue tees is pretty amazing. Like I can't carry any of the the fairway bunkers from the tips, but so I like playing the blue tees.
Right.
Golf is easier when you move forward, right?
Couldn't agree more. At 54, I'm creeping further and further ahead now just to try to keep up with all the younger guys. Definitely. So, all right. So you weren't going to let me forget, right? I wanted to talk about bunkers, because this is I don't want to call it a point of contention, but there's been a lot of discussion about, and I think it really started out in the Northwest, but about the method of lining bunkers that you employed. I did it a lot, never found any fault in the process. Talk about that. And this will start a fight somewhere, I'm sure, because it can't work this way. But how did you do it?
So, well, first off, the liner selection is sod.
Right.
I will say the caveat that I would have liked to be more involved with the pre-planning process and at least maybe explore some of the newer technology out there. But with the sod line bunkers is, I don't know, a generational method in the Pacific Northwest for lining bunkers. And it's pretty straightforward. You excavate the bunker, establish the sod, get it, well rooted, and then you kill it and you put the sand on top of it, and you use that thatch layer as your liner. I think it has its pros and cons. They drain relatively well. I think that, and I don't have any quantifiable data, this is just my personal impression, I think they can contaminate a lot quicker. Because you just have, eventually if you do get washouts, you just have exposed soil coming through.
Have you seen washouts?
I have. And then that's also one of the reasons why I would have liked to explore, one of the more porous, better billy or capillary concrete, just to at least do a side by side. And I'm actually going to try and roll that out to the membership. We are doing another hole here pretty soon, even just do one test bunker so I could at least compare the two from a performance standpoint. I just don't know if there's a lot of information on like a return on investment too, right? I know those types of newer technologies have their own headaches. Like you're constantly managing sand depths, right? Because you don't want anybody breaking their sand wedge.
Well, and the front load cost is certainly a consideration as well on any of those systems. And that's why I wanted you to talk about it, because you're double the precip that we are here. And I haven't seen the breakdown, but I also haven't seen some of the bunker designs that you guys installed, and was just curious. I mean, it's a long game thing too. What's it going to look like 10 years from now? But I know there's a lot of clubs in your area that are using that method, and maybe it's because they're reinvesting all the time and they're not worried about the 20-year life expectancy. They're just looking at 10 or whatever.
Yeah, well, and there are a lot of clubs in the area that haven't redone their bunkers in a long time. I've worked with some of them, and they are sod liners, and they do perform pretty well. I mean, I would actually say, a lot of our troublesome washout areas are not necessarily how steep the bunker face is, but it's the reorientation of where the bunker is now requires some type of subsurface drainage to prevent surface runoff into the bunker, and so that's the joys of a renovation versus new construction, right?
Well, and the worst thing about all of that is having to go in and make adjustments post construction, because you just took the golf course away from us for how many months, and we invested this much money. But it's a living, breathing thing, and maybe you missed a drainage line, or maybe because you recontoured that green complex, the water ended up in a didn't expect. So it's definitely a moving target.
And I agree. But fortunately, I work for such a great membership. They are so understanding and reasonable with the new golf course, and they're invested. They want to just continue to proactively improve their experience, and tip of the cap to them too. They really are kind of the pioneers of this new trend of renovations in the Pacific Northwest. It was historically, close the golf course one hole at a time, or 3 holes at a time, and nobody ever really ripped the Band-Aid off in our region, and they did. And now other clubs are seeing that it's not that bad to walk away from your golf course for 9 months and then come back to something plug and play ready.
Yeah, you got to hire a new superintendent, though, obviously, to make that transition successful, right?
I don't know.
You got to bring in the new guy first,
right?
No, it's you bit off a lot. So obviously you've had to staff up. Did you have a pretty good team in place when you got there, and you augmented that, or was it kind of a rebuild sort of situation?
We had a lot of pieces in place, but it was just such a probably one of the biggest challenges for me was not only managing the renovation, but being a superintendent at a new job. So juggling those balances of addressing the operation, getting to know the staff, learning their core strengths, and all of that, trying to develop my culture. It was almost fast forwarded too quick because we had the pressure cooker of the renovation. In some regards it was great because there was no BS. It was like pretty cut and dry, like you're either riding this ship or not. And we had a good crew. We have had a lot of turnover because a lot of guys didn't sign up for the renovation and were caught off guard by it a little bit. So there was some natural attrition, but the guys that are still on staff, albeit very few, are our key performers during the renovation and still great employees. So it's been great. Probably with the I would say in my situation in particular, with drinking from a fire hose and trying to juggle all these balls, I needed somebody to juggle with me, and I didn't have that on site at the time. So I brought over Sean Doherty, who's our first assistant, and he actually worked with us at Sahali as well.
Okay.
And he was excited going back to chasing experience and new exposures. Like he was, more pumped than I was to do the project in some regards. But it was so nice having him and having our previous work history, to where a lot of those, standards of what the golf course needed to look like post remodel, were already ironed out.
Yeah.
And that's really what I would have liked to have with the entire staff, not necessarily moving pieces around, but just having some more time to establish that culture and those standards of what the maintenance is like, and more than anything, have some additional time to get them excited about the project. I mean, this was a big deal for the club and the area.
Yeah.
Kind of get a little more buy-in, just so that when the tough times were tough, they weren't really tough, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think, regardless of whether you had that project looming or not, I mean, if you're replacing a guy retiring after 35 years, there's going to be some attrition because you're not the same guy, and I think that's, I don't get the sense you're taking it personally, but I think that's a natural thing for, there's going to be a certain percentage of them that just aren't going to buy in, and that's the way it goes. Hopefully they found other things to do and you kind of move on. So, all right, so let's wrap up. I told you it would go really quick. We're at an hour.
Fast.
So let's wrap up by, kind of packaging in a couple of minutes. Maybe it's a little bit of a reiteration, but kind of package if an assistant or an intern is listening to this, what are the important first three steps that they should be looking at, and how far out, and are you zeroing in on a region? What, in your experience, maybe that's how we should package it. In your experience, what were the 2 or 3 decisions that you made along the way that were really key to getting you to where you are now?
I think, first and foremost, knowing where I wanted to be. I honestly didn't have a timeline. I just had that carrot dangled in front of me in terms of, hey, I want to be a superintendent at the Pacific Northwest high-end private club. And then you kind of know, you can start looking backwards on what you need to do to get there.
Right.
And so I would say, partially regional. Like there is some, especially with how the competitive the market is getting, being well versed in the region that you want to be. Like I wouldn't sniff a second interview down in the desert for where they're doing overseeding and stuff like that. And so regional, and then more than anything, don't be afraid to get out of your comfort zone. If you really want it, it's going to feel good. It's not easy to put in that extra time, or go to that green committee, or serve on that board. But the value added experience, just taking those extra steps because they're going to help you in the long run. Like short-term sacrifices for long-term gain are really key, in my opinion. I've done a lot of that, and I feel like I've become more well-rounded. Like even being president of my fraternity, like I did nothing turf related, but I learned how to at least try and motivate 80 college guys without paying them a wage. Right.
Right. Good point.
Just easier said than done.
Yeah.
And then lastly, like I can't just drive home the mentorship. Like we're in such a close-knit community. Like I love listening to your guys' podcast and listen to guys talk about their jobs. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a close-knit industry. The networking is key. If you're a young guy, Steve Keeley told me this, my first conference in Orlando, 2008. He's like, man, just put your name tag on, and go introduce people, introduce yourself to people, shake hands. And I one thing that I really like to do is, obviously networking with the assistants and the other the assistants and the other students. But I just go stand next to the superintendents and listen to what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Try and dress for the job you want, not the one that you're in. I mean, there's still a lot to be said about, taking care of business in your existing role and responsibilities, but you're never going to get to where you want to be if you don't have that type of exposure and experience, right?
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, for sure. Great advice. I think that's and on my side of the mountains, there's a lot of superintendents that are 5-10 years away from retirement, and so there's somebody that's going to take that role. A lot of assistants have done a really good job in this area of putting themselves out there, making sure that the decision makers know who they are, so that when that time comes, and some superintendents will pull them into that, and others, it's going to be incumbent upon them to really, like you said earlier, insert themselves into that situation, so that that face value is a big deal, especially if there's going to be a transition. You want to be the first one considered, not the last one.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, good advice. Marcus, thank you for joining me. This is good. I warned him at the beginning that the hour would go pretty quickly once we kind of start the conversation, and it flew by. But for all of you listening, thanks for tuning in, and hopefully Marcus's experience, maybe we picked up a few pointers along the way. And I know you're active on. Are you active on Twitter? I don't know if you are. I know you're active on Instagram.
Yeah, just Instagram, SPCC Turf.
Perfect.
We throw some
check
cool
them out
stuff on there every once in a while. I try and follow everybody else. So
yeah, scroll back a little bit to see some of the construction pictures. It's pretty. It was a pretty cool process and an outstanding result. I can't wait to get over in the next couple of weeks and see what's going on over there. So, Marcus, thanks so much for joining us. Thank you all for listening in, and we'll catch you again next week.
All right.